So what's just happened here then is I have just made the whole car unusable. Oh, you beauty! So much waste and so much unnecessary just to fit something in that won't fit lying down, but better than printing in two pieces and trying to stick it together. Time to clean it up now. So there's some extensive finishing to do here. There we have it. That's our main piece. So there's just a little bit of tidying up to do. At this point it can be as little as just getting rid of all the hairy bits and leaving it as that, or I can go to town on it and sand it down, get it all nice and smooth, paint it, wrap it, aqua dip it. The design would suggest that it's that way round because that's the only way that it reads true. So therefore it's an insert bezel, which means it's going to provide a little bit of shade for the gauges. Also if the gauges protrude, which almost all of them do, well, almost every gauge I've ever seen protrudes from its mount, then it gives some space for the gauge to sit inside here without actually protruding from the dash in total. So this little, what looks like an desk organiser can now go in the scrap pile. That can be melted down and turned into something when I've got enough scrap. So here's the gauge holder after a bit of a rough up. It's not looking great, but it's functional. I have lost the middle of the 4. Tried to find it, but I couldn't find it. Oh, and I've lost the middle of the O as well on the Volvo. I didn't even notice that. But yeah, I can always print another one if I'm bothered about those things, which I'm not. It's just a design that someone came up with. It was really difficult to get the, the sticky outy bits in between the lettering to go. Trying to do it with some kind of miniature screwdriver or something like that, just you have to put a lot of pressure on, and then you're sort of forcing the supports then for the letters, and if you try and heat that up to melt a clear path, which is what I ended up doing, it kind of works, but then you end up sort of inadvertently melting into certain areas a little bit, and it's a bit sketchy. So I just thought, why am I wasting time on that when I'm not really bothered about it? But I've given it a good rough up. I've had to enlarge the holes a little bit to make sure the gauges fit, and now it's ready to be sprayed. So I'm just going to spray this in black acrylic spray paint, and it'll be ready to install in the vehicle, hopefully. So obviously if I cared anything about how this looks, I would be fillering it, priming it, all sorts of stuff just to make sure it's perfect, but we don't care about that, so I'm just going to use some cheap acrylic spray paint. I'm well aware of chances of getting good results from this, but I just think it'll look a little bit better than the way it looks now. So yeah, I just thought let's give it some light mists, build up some coats, see if we can get a half decent finish on it. So that's after one coat, that's after two coats, that's after three coats, that is after four coats, and that's after five coats. But it's wet, so I'm guessing it's just going to keep drying the same, which is what happens when you don't fill it in, prime it, so that's fine. But it's got a hefty layer of paint on there now, so I'll let that dry, and we'll get some gauges ready. So what we have here then is a printed gauge mount with 4 gauges in, clamped in somewhat. The end one was an upgrade. I don't know if I previously said this, but it was an upgrade because they are out of stock of the one that I ordered. It's got some kind of peak/warning feature on there, which I mean, I'm not really in need of that, but that came with its own pod, so therefore it didn't have a mounting bracket, but that's fine. It's in tight and it's kind of glued in, so it'll be fine. I've obviously left the lens protectors on for now. There's a nice gouge through my paint in the middle, but it doesn't matter because the whole thing looks like crap anyway. No matter how much paint you put on, this is always going to sink into the grooves unless you fill it and prime it first, so it looks really rough. But I haven't got enough patience or time to try and get it looking good at the moment. It's just a cheap 3D printed part that I don't even know if it's going to fit properly yet, so I just thought I'd work on this end of it for now. So as you can see, I've plugged in all the wiring looms, so there's quite a lot of spaghetti to sort through. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a simplified wiring loom for the installation. So over here we have several sets of instructions for wiring diagrams and the any modules or sensors that need plugging in for all the gauges that are here. So on the right here we've got the wideband AFR gauge. Then we've got the oil pressure, then the fuel pressure, then the oil temperature. Didn't have to have any of these gauges. I could have just whacked in the chip and drove it. But because I'm going with a bigger turbo than what it's designed and been created for on the chip, there could be some differences in air fuel mixture, and there could be some leaning out going on, and sort of overrunning on injector duty cycle, that kind of thing. However, they are up-rated injectors as well, 470cc, and I feel like if I'm going to be going over the 470cc, at that point I'm probably making enough power to break the standard internals, or at least the rods, but who knows. I mean, some people claim that they've ran close to 400 brake horsepower on standard internals on normal fuel, but you don't know whether to trust that. I mean, you should never trust people's claims anyway, so it's a lot to go off, and a lot to ignore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out where each of these wires goes to. I am going to, obviously some of them are going to go under the dash and be wired up to power and ground or earth, and because these gauges light up in 2 colour options, there'll be a third wire that needs to be wired in to set the colour of which colour you want it to wire up, which colour you want it to light up in, and whether or not you want that to change when you switch the lights on for like a nighttime colour scheme. For me, it's the green turbo machine, so I've already gone with green dash lights and interior lights and all that kind of stuff, so I might as well go with green all the time. So that's what so it's going to be a simple setup. I think that means just connecting the orange wire, but don't quote me on that, I'm going to read the instructions. Either way, if a lot of these wires need to go into the dash, I can join them all together, wrap them in insulation tape. I should really use proper wiring loom tape, but can't be arsed buying any. I've got a load of insulation tape, it's almost as good, and a lot of older cars just use that anyway. So then there'll be a bunch of wires that need to go through the bulkhead to the engine bay, and within the engine bay they may need to split off to different areas. So I'm going to go through all of these, I'm going to figure out where they're all going to, and I'm going to group them into mini looms, if you will. So there'll be a big thick loom coming off here, that'll split up into mini looms and go to different places, and I'm going to label all the wires and all the looms so I know exactly where to put them in the car. That way, when it comes to installing the whole thing, should be at least a little bit more simple, if not just as fiddly. So I'll do that now and show you how I've got on. So hopefully you'll agree that is a lot more simple. So I've got all of my positive constant 12 volts, switched 12 volts and earths in one place. So I just need to join them into single connectors, and they can then run a second wire over to the sources for where they want to connect onto the car's wiring loom. I then have this wire which needs to go further across the dash and plug into the control unit. There it is, for the AFR gauge, so that has its own loom, and controller will sit slightly in a different place. Then I've got this sub loom coming off it, which goes through the bulkhead. So oil pressure wires, fuel pressure wires, which will link up to oil pressure sensor and fuel pressure sensor, which can be installed from the engine bay. So I just need to put some connectors on these wires, do the same on these, and they will meet each other where they need to be in the engine bay. Then there's this last one, which is for the oil temperature sensor, and that runs all the way, almost all the way to the sensor, which is just that with the little bullet connectors on. So this is ready to just be posted through the firewall and into the engine bay and route to where it needs to go. This will be heading down towards the fuse box area, then that will be running past there and under the steering wheel over to the driver's side, where I'm going to hook up the wire, the control box for the AFR gauge. What else have we got to add to that? So then I can run this wire through the bulkhead and disconnect it here, and then this we can reconnect from the bulkhead side, from the engine bay side, which has got the lambda sensor on, the wideband. This has its own little wiring, power and gauge colour trigger wires, as well as the earth. So ideally that would come back over and meet where these ones connect, at the fuse box. But obviously it'd be a bit complicated and annoying to connect that now and make it all sort of sit together. So that'll be a little bit of routing to do under the dash, which is fine. Just limits it to minimal, and then this is the output from the controller, which has some wires that want to go into the boost controller. That's going to read the AFR information so that it can protect the engine should it go into an overlean condition, and it will automatically limit or reduce boost as and how I set it to. So we're looking a lot neater there, so we're ready to go into the car now and install at least this part, and then we can figure the rest out as and when appropriate. So here we are in the car with our gauges. Ho ho ho. That's going to go in there. Let's see how that's going to work. Can we pry the gauges out? I seem to remember that you can pry these vents out, but that's not necessarily going to help because I don't know. I'm going to pry them out anyway. It doesn't get you the whole thing out, and that's what we need, but it might assist us. So the mechanism here is all contained within the frame of this. So it's pulling this out now, and rather than getting a screwdriver under here and prying down, because it makes all these marks which are still not healed, I think it's best to get in there with your hands and try to pull, because I remember now it's like backwards grip teeth. It's like a gripper rod sort of setup that's on the outside of this that sort of grips the dash material, if I remember rightly. It might be a two-handed job. So it kind of was a two-handed job, but I just thought to myself, hang on a minute, surely trim removal tools would have done that. I just forgot they existed. There you go. So you can see there that if you could get a trim removal tool in there and sort of force it inwards, you could release those spiky bits that are trying to catch on there. Let's give you some light. They're trying to catch on there. As you can see, it's all shredded up because I've just been pulling like an idiot. But don't worry, the idiocy doesn't end there. So, vents are now gone. We've just got a big old air duct. So how's that gonna sit with us? Good question. Hang on a minute. Oh dear. I seem to have accidentally detached this from the actual... let's just pretend that didn't happen. So, ignoring the fact that the wires have got nowhere to go other than into the heater box, let's just shove them in the hole, just for practice sake. This is a two-handed bit. Right, we're in. So they're just shoved down that hole for now. I don't need to worry about that just yet. The question is, how does this fit? And does it fit? I mean, someone made it, so, and published it, but that doesn't mean it fits. Oh, okay, right, so it's sitting quite nicely in the, what do you want to call it, the recess. It's not sort of wanting to stay, it's not that tight, but it's not too big or anything like that, so that's a start. So looking at that from here, that's acceptable in terms of, well, it's not acceptable in terms of presentation because I've made an absolute dog's arse of it, but that's fine. I don't even like this bit. It's possibly supposed to act as an actual air vent, but I don't know. Once you get rid of those big vents, you're not really going to get much coming through there. So yeah, I'm just going to do a Dan special and put a sticker over it, I think. If I can be arsed at any point, I will pull the whole thing back out again and just basically prep it properly and spend some time working on it to get it like a smooth finish, or maybe try and vinyl wrap it or something, but it looks like a horrible shape to vinyl wrap. The texture would show through anyway, so it's pointless. Let's just stop talking about it. It's just there to hold the gauges. So the gauges are in. What I'm going to have to do, I think, is just apply something to the back of here, like some kind of adhesive / sealant, you know, like a silicone based one that will hold it in place but not make it impossible to remove. Or would that be enough to sort of create a situation where it had to be broken to get it out again? I don't know. What else? What other options have I got there? There's a little lip there where it's touching at the back, just here, and that is something I could mount, you know, an adhesive bead to. I suppose I could do that, and just if ever I need to remove it, just gently use some trim removal tools, and it should just ease out. If I get really desperate, I could probably remove the clocks and go in from the side to push it out without breaking the mould. But then again, I could just reprint one if need be. It's not going to look any worse than this. Right, so in that case, I know how I'm going to fit it, but I don't want it fitted yet because I've got to route all the wiring first. So where have we got to go? Well, some of it wants to go to power and earth location, switched power as well, and some of it wants to go to another location where I'm going to house the boost controller. So that means directly below is where the fuse box lives. So if we just get ourselves some access to the fuse box. There we are. Always makes me cringe when I see that, because it looks like it's, you know, it looks like it's not sat right, but that's how it sits. So where are we then? So we're going to go straight down to that, which by my memory is actually not going to be as straightforward as I thought. Potentially, what's that down there? Heater core, is it? Yeah, it is. Amazing how easy it is to see the thing versus how hard it is to get the thing out. So obviously we've got this flap here which doesn't need to be here. As soon as you lift it, you can see the wiring for the radio and such, or the controls here first. I'm thinking sort of slide it under there. Well, maybe cut some of this out, because let's be honest, it's not going to be used as a vent again, and if it is, some poor bugger's going to have to get one of these. It's just the way it is, because it ain't me. But I'm going to cut some of this out, I think, because if I were to have the loom's going to be sat here before it can go anywhere. So for it to try and get under there with this in place is impossible. Could go down there and sort of drill a hole, but no. I mean, to be fair, this is quite a small piece. I can't remember. I think it's stapled. to the next bit. Is that a staple mark there? There you go. Staple to the next bit, so I'm not going to be able to pull it out. So the simplest thing to do would be to cut myself a flap going down there, and maybe just roll that back in and sort of put it down, put its tongue down its own throat. That'll be fine. That'll give me some access. All my wires can go down then. Some of them can come across underneath the clocks and over to where they need to go, and the other ones can go straight down to the power source and the earth source. Then I need to decide where I'm going to bring wires through the bulkhead, because there is a dedicated bulkhead sort of route that has a little corrugated rubber tube. It was pretty difficult getting the little line for the current boost gauge I've got installed through there, because you've got to force it to follow a route, and it's not really easy to get wiring to do that, even if you've got sort of feeding rods and stuff, especially not on the little angles that I've been working with and trying to start off in such tight sort of corners of the vehicle. It's right up under the, it's sort of in the top corner of the firewall under the dash, so it's not easy. So I'm going to scout around and see where else we can come through and figure that out. But yeah, for now I'm going to make myself some access, and I'm going to tidy up. Well, I'm going to create some connectors here. So I'm going to have all my oranges together, all my whites together, all my blacks together, and all my reds together. Create some single connector to go onto the next part of the loom, which can then attach to what it needs to attach to. So there's a slight change of plan. So I've got some ends on there now. That's my orange wires that I'm going to attach to our accessory. That's my earth, and that's my constant positive. I've just covered the white ones up because they're not needed on my colour scheme. Cut myself a big old chunk of that out and just peeled it back. So if need be, it could be put back and maybe you know, taped together with some kind of foam adhesive tape. Let's be honest, that's not going to happen. What I'm going to do is run under there, and I'm going to run under everything under the dash, and the reason why, well, under the clocks, because the crappy cheap boost gauge that I put in, that the wires that power that, excuse my messy loom, are these two here. Where are my fingers? These two here, and they go up. I don't know if you can see. They go up into that, which again looks a bit ugly, but it's insulated. No one's going to see up there. Anyway, what that is like a little junction that I gave myself when I had all the fuse box out and stuff. It is a pretty heavy gauge wire for an earth and an ignition switched feed. So I'm going to go there for what I need. And yeah, I know I need a constant positive as well, but do I? Is it going to do anything? Just joining them together? It's not like they're going to remember any memory or anything like that. I mean, the advanced one might, but I'm not really interested in those features, so I think I'm going to just try and do it simply and just wire it up. The orange and the red to switched ignition, and the earth to earth, and go from there. So I've obviously took off my under under driver's dash bottom cover, if you want to call it. I've got my hole, I've got my terminated ends, so I guess I'm ready to just feed it through and unwrap that junction and reuse it for this purpose instead. So what I've done here is I've poked the longest bit of the loom through, and I've sort of headed it over this way, and under here I can just about see it, so I'm going to try and grab it with these forceps and pull it through a little bit. So there we are, that's our first bit of wiring through. Now what I'm going to do before I pull any more through is find the next longest bit and just tape it to the wire with a bit of insulation tape, so that that gets pulled through with it, and then, you know, tape the shortest bit to that so that I can just pull on that one piece and everything will get brought through in the same route. There we are, got the next bit taped, next bit taped up and taped to the rest of the loom, the next bit taped to the rest. So I should be able to now pull this. That's now taking the next bit in for me. I'm just going to help it over that ledge. Obviously this isn't foolproof. If it gets caught on something, it'll just pull the tape off, but if you can sort of gently pull, wiggle and help it through, definitely a two-handed job. So got quite a bit of it through at the moment. Just down to the last bit now, so as we're pulling this, it's bringing the rest of that through. Lift her over, but don't lift a vauxhall. So are we clear there? Pull, pull. Yep, that's feeling good. That's feeling good. That whole thing's wanting to go. There we are. Right, now we're lifting the weight of the dials, so I'm going to have to help the rest of it in with my other hand. So we've got it to that point now. What is there to say here? I need to make sure that loom piece gets over that lip. I've already gone around and tightened these nuts to make sure they're not going to vibrate loose. You can put a bit of thread locker on them if you're really that bothered, but not for me. I'm just winging it. So that should now fit as we had it before, in place. It's a little bit pushy outy, but I think it's because the loom's quite stiff and the way it's sat, it wants pulling through more. And there you go, as I pull the loom through more, now it wants to sit back further, so that's good. So we're sort of in position. We've not tightened anything in place in terms of securing the loom, so at any point in the future I should be able to sort of wiggle that back out just to put some sealant around it, which I'm not going to do until I know that everything's working properly. So for now that can stay there. Now we've got all the wires down there, so I'm going to start exposing some electrical connection points and identifying some sort of pass-through areas for the bulkhead or the firewall. So what I've done here under the bonnet is I've identified all of the items, all of the pieces of loom that need to come through the bulkhead, and I've laid them all out under the bonnet in such a way. Say this here, we've got the fuel pressure sensor with the inline adapter. So I've held that into the position that I want it to be in, which is going to be somewhere between here and sort of down there, so it will fit either way. And then what I've done is I've routed its little wire along the bulkhead where my engine loom goes, and I've repeated the process with the plug for the map sensor for the boost controller. I've got a plug here for what is that for? I think that's for the boost solenoid, boost controller solenoid. We've got this here for the oil pressure. So, right, so what I've done under the bonnet is I've gathered all the pieces of wiring that need to pass through the bulkhead. So, get a wire. This is one end of the wire that's going to be the side that lives in the engine bay, and this is the oil pressure sensor. So I've held that down where the oil pressure switch is, and then whilst holding that in place with one hand, I've routed the wire up along the route that I want it to take until I meet the bulkhead. At the bulkhead, I then passed it underneath these sort of factory zip ties, as far as I can tell, and sent it along. And I've done the same with the fuel pressure sensor, the plug for the boost solenoid, the plug for the map sensor. These are both parts of the boost controller, by the way, not the gauges themselves, but it all needs to be installed. The boost controller will be giving me a boost gauge in itself. So all these pieces and all these parts and plug for the lambda sensor and stuff like that, they're all just hanging around with enough length on them to go where I know they need to go. I've also given them an extra couple of inches because it's always good to have sort of an extra couple of inches, as you can imagine. And what I've done is I've sent them along here. I was going to try and feed them down this tube, which is built for passing things through the bulkhead, but that didn't go to plan because there's just too many of them. It's quite a thick bundle. So what I've done is I've had to make an extra hole. Well, not an extra hole, but let's see if we can zoom in here. So that's the main bulkhead grommet that passes the main loom through. Now you can't really see it from here. Oh, you can there. If I show you down there, there's like a little nipple that's coming off it, and that is there as like an add-on. So you can slice off you know, the end of it, just cut it there and then send a wire through, or a cable or something like that. So there was one of them there. So what I've done is cut away at that to make a small hole, and then slice that hole to make it a bit bigger. I know it's not right, it's not proper, but at least I'm cutting through a rubber grommet that can be replaced if need be, and not through the bulkhead itself. I didn't want to drill any holes really. So that is now through there, and that includes everything. I've taped it all together and put it through as one loom. Not fully taped it, I just lightly taped it together so I can undo it and send everything to the right place on the other side. What I'm going to do from here now is just apply some sealant around there, even though, to be fair, that's an area, let me just zoom back out, that's an area that stays quite dry because it's directly underneath this piece of bodywork. and even if water was able to drip past this weather strip, you know, it'd run off the side of that bodywork and straight down to the drain. It's not going to hang around long enough to go inside that rubber. But with this weather strip doing its job, the water actually goes to this corner and then just drips straight down to the drain anyway. So I'm not worried about any water getting in. The moisture that you can see there is just WD-40 that I've used to lube it all up to get it all in. So the wires for the majority of the sensors are now hanging out in the engine bay ready to connect at this side, and hanging out in the driver's footwell ready to connect the other side. Whilst I've got this off though, I say the majority of the sensors because there's one which is the oil temperature sensor. For some reason that one has one long wire from the gauge all the way to the sensor, which obviously needs to be under the bonnet, so I'm going to have to post that through this tube. I'm thinking it'll be easy enough just to get it up into the engine bay, and that can go to the sensor location, which I'm not even sure where I'm going to put that yet, because that's the one thing I've overlooked here. So I might need to buy an extra adapter or something. Anyway, yeah, other than that, one little note here: if you do want to buy any of these gauges, so I did mess up twice. So I previously said that the red wires on the gauges, on the power loom for the gauges, should be connected to constant positive, and then it's either the orange or the white that you connect to a switched live to get the colour that you want. Now I read that for all gauge types that I have ordered, and it was all the same, so I proceeded to wire them all up the same. However, what I didn't realise is that on the one that they... Oh, and not only that, I went against that rule and wired them to just come on, you know, they were all to switched, because you know, it was just easier to do it that way. I had a switched ignition live, but I didn't have a constant live readily available, so without having to tap into something else. So just for convenience, I thought I'll just wire them all to that. Turns out I was wrong. They actually did all want to be to switched, as in both the red wire and the orange or white wire, both are supposed to go to ignition live. So that kind of would have been great until I realised that the upgraded gauge that they sent me wasn't coming on. So at that point I figured I'll just recheck the instructions, and of course the instructions, so even though that's an oil temperature gauge, and the oil temperature, there are instructions for an oil temperature gauge in the same packet as what my fuel pressure gauge I think came in. So they were the instructions I was going off, whereas the upgraded gauge had a set of different instructions for an oil temperature gauge for itself, which said something along the lines of red to constant positive, white to switched ignition, and then you do the colours using the settings on the buttons. So I had a situation where everything was turning on with the ignition and everything was losing power with the ignition off. So a couple of gauges were coming on, and the oil temperature gauge was coming on in its default colour, in its default setting every time. So I had to then take the wiring loom apart and take the red from that gauge out of the connector that had all the reds going to it, get rid of the dead end that was covering all the whites, and take the white out that was specific to that gauge, and then add that into the reds with a new connector and take the other red off and put it to a constant live. A bit of a ball ache, to be honest, but I wanted it to be right, so yeah, just a heads up, if you're going to get mix and match, just beware that they are different, or if you end up getting a free upgrade or something, they are different wiring diagrams. So I'll carry on from here. Let's have a look in the driver's footwell. We now have a freshly squeezed engine bay mega loom, which obviously is just roughly taped up, so I'm going to wind the tape off this now and get everything separated. Right, there we are, that's better. So we've got our the wires for our oil pressure gauge, which as we can see here, oil pressure coming from the clocks, so it's going to be a bit tight, that one, but we might just get them to connect up without an extension. Might be a bit of wiggle room if I fully unwrap this, in terms of you know, having it come through the bulkhead a bit further, because they're not exactly even though they're bundled together, they're not bound fully. Fuel pressure, that's for the wideband controller. That'll be the map sensor for the boost controller, and that'll be the solenoid for the boost controller. So we've got everything we need here, so I'm now going to get this routed properly, obviously connect the gauge ends to each other and get the controller in here so that we can start plugging in bits of that loom. I say controller, I mean the wideband controller, and then also get the boost controller control box in here, because we can start plugging bits of that in as well, and joining the power, earth and switch ignition lines up for both of those to bring them in to this. I've got an earth here, and just on the end of here, if I were to pull this sheathing off, I've got a constant live, and there's a switched live as well just a bit further up that I can tap into. So we've got everything we need there, so let's get some extra bits in. So here is the wideband controller that wants to be plugged into, right, so that wants this that's come through the bulkhead to plug into it to give input from the sensor. Alright, so let's plug that in there. Then we've got the output from the sensor that we can attach to the boost controller for the safety function. This is the power loom for the control box, and then we want the cable coming from the gauge to go into that side. So that's the box fully sort of plugged in. We've just got a bit of tidying up to do on the wires. We've got to terminate these ends and connect them to what they need to be connected to, but obviously I'm not going to do that until I've got the other power loom from the boost controller control box. So let's move on to that one. So here we are, got the control box here for the boost controller. Something tells me this is going to be a screen, which is interesting, but you won't need to see what's on it unless you're doing what's it called, calibration mode and stuff like that. Although I think you also get an output on the main display. You can play with that anyway and figure that out. So for this one, we're going to want the power loom plugging into it, and just like magic, there it is. Then we're going to want the display plugging into it, and there we are. Then we're going to want the sensor, there's the wires from under the bonnet, so we're going to have the map sensor and the boost solenoid plugging in. Getting a bit messy now, and the last thing to be plugged in will be this little one, which is going to be giving the input from this guy here into the boost control unit, giving it some AFR signal from the AFR controller. So these two wires will connect to two of those wires, I'm guessing, and that they will connect together. So I'm going to get all of these wires now tidied up somewhere now that they're all connected, and get the ends of this power loom terminated and the ends of that power loom terminated, and any common ones terminated together, so that we can quickly and easily just link them into the power outlets we've got, and try and find somewhere to mount the control unit that is out of the way but easily accessible should I need to get back to it to recalibrate. And same with the control unit for this, considering it does have a calibration function as well. Right, so looking a bit tidier, still messy but a bit tidier. Definitely not cable management porn, but it's not going to hang down and get caught or anything. Nothing's going to get pulled apart, nothing's going to short out, nothing's going to touch the steering wheel shaft column. Yeah. Here is the back of the control unit for the boost controller. So we've got the power there, we've got the boost solenoid there, the display unit there, the map sensor there, and this last 3-pin one is going to be this wire, which gives the signal, so it takes a signal from the wideband. That is the wideband controller box, and that's the analog output. There's the cable coming out, and there's the other end of it. So we've got a green, a black and a brown, and here we've got a green and a black. So it looks like it's just going to be green to green and black to black. But just to be on the safe side, I'm going to check the instructions. Right, here we go. So analog output wire harness instruction: black engine ground, brown wideband analog output, green narrowband analog output. So that would suggest to me because we're using a wideband, we're going to use brown and black, which would then mean that, so this is the instructions that came with the wideband kit and the gauge. So obviously this is output from the control unit, and it's using these wires, so I'm not going to need this green. I'm not going to need this green. If we know that the brown is the output for the wideband and the black is the ground, So if we look at the wiring diagram for the boost controller, green is positive and black is ground. So that green is going to go, so this green is going to go to this brown, and that's going to read the wideband, and then the black's going to go to the black. Whether or not they actually need to be grounded as well, I'm not sure, but if one goes to the other, I mean, I might as well just bloody connect them to the earth as well. If that's what they want to do, if they want to be grounded, then probably best off connecting them that way, because that's going into one control box and that's going into another. Now, you'd assume there'd be a ground in the control boxes on the circuit boards that allow them to connect, but if you assume and you run into issues, then it could be your assumption where the issue was created. So I'm going to ground both of these and connect the green here to the brown here, and other than that, it's just the two power harnesses that need to be spliced together and connected up to the power source, and then we are good to go on the interior. I have chosen this area for the boost gauge to go. It's not ideal because it's pretty far down, it's underneath the stereo, but it's on a bit of an angle facing up, and it fits in there quite tightly. I couldn't figure out anywhere nice to put it on the dash or the clocks. Everywhere's a bit of a funny angle or covering something that's functional, so I'm just going to go with that for now. It can be changed at a later date, but yeah, get all this finished up under here, then that's the inside done, and it's just a case of connecting the sensors up under the bonnet and we are good to go. So that's all the wiring complete inside. Everything's been tucked away and you know, sort of cable tied away from moving parts. I've got my controllers here which I can see and access the very few buttons or whatever you want to call it, sides of them that need to show me something. Still a little bit loose on the gauge mount, but that's fine. It's just the way it's sitting because of the stiffness of the loom behind it, but that'll quite easily sit in place and stay put once I get some you know, some adhesive on the back of there. And we've got the little boost controller display there, so I'll zoom out a little bit. I'll turn the ignition on and everything is starting up now. Everything starts up but nothing displays any figures, and that's because there's nothing connected to the ends of any of these gauges right now, so that's the last bit to do. So if we go under the bonnet, remind ourselves what we have to do. So we've got this very small piece of loom that's come through here that I've pushed up. That's got the two bullet connectors on the end that I've wrapped in insulation tape. That's going to go down to oil temperature. Still yet to work out where I'm going to pick up from the oil temperature. In the meantime, we've got the rest of the components from the boost controller kit to mount, because we've got a plug for the map sensor there, or is that a plug for the I think that's a plug for the solenoid and a plug for the map sensor, one or the other. So they need to be mounted. We've got the fuel pressure sensor which needs to be plumbed in, and mounted somewhere along the pressurized fuel line. We've got the lambda sensor connector, which obviously needs to link up to the Wideband O2 loom, and then we've got the oil pressure sensor, which is going to sort of piggyback off the oil pressure switch that goes into the block. So I will crack on with this, and I think I'm going to start with the fuel pressure sensor. So if I've got this right, then I'll have purchased the correct size adapter. So I'm going to put some PTFE tape on these barbed connections. I think they came tightened into it anyway, but I'm just going to take them out and use some PTFE tape. Same around the sensor, even though it's coated in something. I don't really trust that. Then I'm going to tighten the sensor down into the adapter. Going to slice me some fuel line and use some hose clips to secure that in place, intercepted into the fuel line, and then plug it back in, and if there's any cable tidying to do, I'll just zip tie it to the nearest bit of loom on the bulkhead. Then I think I'm going to go with the oil pressure, because that's a nice easy one. So for that, let's get some light on the job. For that, we're going to want to be down here, if you can see. Oh, let's go there. Is that it? There we go, oil pressure sensor. So just whip that out, screw this in its place. I might use a copper crush washer as well as some PTFE tape. Then same again on that side, insert the pressure switch into there, PTFE tape and a crush washer, and same with the sensor itself, just wind that down into the adapter with some PTFE tape, and then try and route the wire somewhere that it's not going to burn, and that'll be that one done. Once those two are done, I think I'm going to move on to the oxygen sensor, or the lambda sensor. So there is one in the downpipe at the moment. It's hard to see, but if I take you down there you go, you can just about see it. It's probably not in focus, but that's, there we go. So that needs to be, what I'm going to do, obviously the engine management is using that sensor to determine its own fuel trims. Now I understand that it's going to need that to run correctly anyway, but I want to know, see, this is the difficult bit for me. I want to know what, I want to first know that the gauge and the sensor's working that I bought, and I also want to know what the engine's running at in terms of richness and as it is now, because it's not fully standard. It's standard with the boost wound up, but I want to know what it's hitting. Now I'm aware that by removing the one that's in now and screwing mine in and having the wideband controller read that and display the figures to me, the engine is then not going to be receiving a signal, or it's going to be receiving a signal if I leave the old one plugged in, that tells it that there's lots of oxygen, which would probably mean that it's telling it that there's not enough fuel, so therefore it'll probably run rich as hell. So therefore I'm probably expecting inaccurate readings on the gauge, which is kind of pointless exercise then. However, in the new system, once I put the manifold on and the downpipe. The downpipe's going to have two bungs. One of them is going to be used for the stock O2 sensor for the ECU to read, and the second one is going to be used for the wideband O2 sensor for the gauge and the control box to read. Therefore the engine can do its thing and the gauge can show me what it's doing. So I'm a bit sort of apprehensive about whether to even bother putting that in. I don't know, we'll see. But that would be the next thing, and then after that get the solenoid and the map sensor, get them mounted somewhere and plug those bits in. So let's get started. So what's just happened here then is I have just made the whole car unusable. I've sliced through this pipe. Woohoo! There we go. I've sliced through this pipe. So previously this pipe was closed. I only had the diameter of it to go off to figure out what size fitting would slide into it, and you know, I estimated that there'd be somewhere between like a 1.5 to 3 mil wall thickness. So I went with the fitting that I thought would fit, and after cutting this I found that now it's a hard line with like a rubber sheathing, so that does not fit. So yeah, I'm now gonna have to go and mess about buying some adapters or some kind of different size barbs fitting or reducer, something like that. But that should be all I need to get the fuel pressure sensor in place. So this is what I was supplied with. So I've taken that out of there, and if you ever do that, just get rid of all the little bits that are stuck inside, because there was a few little shavings of metal. There was some of the what I can only assume was pipe seal or something that had been put in there by the manufacturer. So I've got this male to male 1/8 MPT adapter there with these are all tapered threads, so they just get tighter and tighter the more you screw them on. Then we've got this female reducer. I'll tell you why this needs to be like this, because the only shop local to me that had a smaller barb had it without the 1/8 fitting, so this is the only fitting they had in stock. Didn't want to wait for one to come from eBay or somewhere. Couldn't really travel because obviously the car's got a punctured, well, a severed fuel line. So that'll screw in there, get some PTFE tape on all that, tighten it all up, and then we've got a smaller barb there which will go inside the fuel line. Repeat on the other side and we're good to go. It's going to be a bit long and a bit bulky, but there's enough space there for it, so shouldn't have any issues there. So here we have the finished product. A bit longer than before, but it should do the job. Everything's FT. So now it should just be a case of sliding her in and clamping her shut. There we are, all in place, ready for the plug. So little splash of WD-40 for good luck, and then our connector. I think We just hook it in there. Don't want it too tight, we want a little bit of play on the wire because the engine can move. And that's what's plugged in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to purge the system of any air. There's a little, if you can see it there, a little dust cap that you can unscrew, and this is basically like a tyre valve, like a Schrader valve. So you can insert something in there to press the little valve open, and that'll just let any air out. But yeah, that should be as simple as that. Just let the excess air out. Should get a reading on the gauge then, get some fuel pressure. So over here with the oil pressure sender, you can only just see, where are we? You can only just make it out really. It's pretty hard to see what's going on. It's pretty hard to reach as well. So as you can see there, we've got the old oil pressure switch, which I've wound out of the block, wound into that hexagonal adapter. That is now wound into the block. They've got new crush washers to seal them, and then you can just see the PTFE tape and a spanner on that nut there, which has got the oil pressure sender attached to it. So I'm just tightening this now, which is a slow process because you can barely get onto the next 12th of the ring spanner, because tight, you know, not the greatest of access. And I could take the inlet pipe off the turbo, get a bit better access there, but I don't actually have to do that, and I don't know how much that would improve it, so I'm just going to persevere getting this tightened up, and then I'll be ready to route that wire somewhere safe, and that'll obviously link back up to the bulkhead, and that'll be the oil pressure switch ready and some oil pressure showing on the gauge. Here is our Bosch Wideband O2 sensor. It came in the O2 AFR gauge kit. Oh, a bit of a dry throat there. I'm about to try and install this. I've got my my lambda sensor removal socket, and I've got a homemade 22mm open-ended crow's foot socket. Don't know which one will work best, but we'll give it a go. So let's go under the vehicle and see how we stand. There is the culprit. So that's a standard O2 sensor, the factory one. I don't know if I can find the end of that wire to unplug it. Ideally, I'm going to want to unplug that to give it no signal whatsoever, and at that point it would then go into like a base setting, or it would go into limp mode, or it may just carry on as it is and try to manage the engine the best it can without that input. I'm not too sure. I've not read into how the ECU is programmed to act when that happens. Either way, I'm going to whip it out. I'm going to protect it with something, so wrap it and then attach it somewhere safe where it won't get wet or damaged or too hot. And I'm going to install the one that came with the kit so we can read something on the gauge. Again, if I get some funny readings, I'm not going to put it down to dodgy sensor or a dodgy gauge or a problem with the engine. I'm going to put it down to the fact that the one that it wants to read off is not installed. That will all go back to normal when I put the custom downpipe on after the turbo. Once the turbo has been upgraded, that'll have two bungs in it, one for the factory sensor and one for the AFR gauge kit. So I'll do that now, and I can't really show you because I can barely see it myself, but I've routed the wire for the oil pressure sensor and that's now plugged in. So we've got oil pressure and fuel pressure that should be shown on the gauge. Once I've plugged this in, that'll be AFRs that should be shown as well. Right, you can't see much, but there's the old sensor. Just put that in a little zippy bag. Zip tied it shut, zip tied it out the way, made sure the cable's out the way. The new one you can just see coming up there, like that ribbed looking thing. That's now plugged into the rest of the loom that had come through the bulkhead. Just looped that round, so that's all ready to be sort of zip tied out of the way. I'm going to wait until I've finished with the rest of the sensors before I do that. So we've got these two cables left, one for the map sensor for the boost controller and one for the boost solenoid valve for the boost controller, which I need to start fitting now. So the first bit is going to be the boost solenoid. Now that wants, from our instructions here, we can see that in this diagram we can see that somewhere between the turbo and the intercooler, so pressurized boost reference, we're going to have a line coming off, going through an air filter and into the solenoid valve. So that will be the same line that was feeding the boost gauge before, and that's here. I've already got it teed in, and I've just put a screw in the end. So I'm just going to pull this line off this T-piece, replace it with the line that they sent, and put that into the solenoid, and figure somewhere to mount the solenoid. So in the box then, once we've removed all the wires that we've already connected, along with the display module which is fitted and the controller box which is fitted, we've got left the actual solenoid valve itself, which has got different labels, so COM, NO, NC for its 3 ports. Then we have 2 air filters for the airlines, some silicone hose, map sensor, a little bag with some barbed outlets for the ports on the solenoid. We've only got 2 because the 3rd port is going to be vented to atmosphere. We've got a little T-piece there to help us plumb in, some cable ties and a piece of sticky mount. I'm guessing that's for the back of the map sensor, but I'm not 100% sure, because over here we've also got this all came in a little bag. That's obviously meant to go on the bottom of there and stick down onto something, and then this is obviously meant to go into there and act as a hinge with that sleeve and that bolt and nut, and they are supposed to then mount something. So I don't know, is that for the map sensor, or is that for the, otherwise I don't know how you'd mount the solenoid valve, because there's only those 2 threaded holes in the bottom there, and if that's how you're supposed to mount it, then it didn't come with a bracket or anything like that, so I will have to make one, I guess. I'll have a look at the instructions and see what they say on that. So I'm pretty sure that that would be a adjustable mount for the display unit actually. So I'm not going to be using that, and the two other strips I'm guessing are for the map sensor and the solenoid valve, and a little strip in that bag potentially for the control box. I don't know, that's how I'm doing it. Also, I've noticed on here two different ways of plumbing it in depending on whether or not you're using a actuator over single port, which I am at the moment, and I also will be when the upgrade goes on, because there it is. However, there's nothing stopping me from upgrading to one with a twin port in the future. And if you look at the one with the twin port, the vac lines go on the ports on the solenoid valve on either side, and the front is left open. Whereas on this setup, you get a line in one side and a line out the front, and the other side is left open. So I'm going to be setting it up this way at the moment. So we're going to want to send the boost reference between the turbo and the intercooler through an air filter and into the front of the solenoid valve. Okay, so I've just used a bit of brake cleaner on this part of the inner wheel well. Got my sticky pad, so I'm going to take the backing off that. I have fitted and tightened the barbed hose connectors onto the bloody hell. Jesus Christ. Get off the fucking thing. I peeled the backing off my sticky pad, so I'm going to have one outlet facing the engine and one facing up. And I'm going to plunk it down there. Press that into place, so it's somewhere that if the sticky pad comes loose, it's not really going to want to fall very far. All the vac lines are going to be zip tied into place anyway, so is the loom. I've ran this plug under here along with this bit of loom here, and coming from the bulkhead there. So a little bit of WD-40 on the plug for good luck. And then can plug that in. Finish off the routing for the cable and tidy it all up, tighten everything up, cut the ends off the zip ties, and cut this hose to length and attach it to the correct port. There we are. So just that last port now, which need to run to the turbo actuator, and just like that it's installed. So move on to the map sensor now. So it's a similar story with the map sensor. It just wants a boost pressure. It just wants a boosted pressure reference. So I'm going to take that from the T-piece that used to feed the boost gauge. It's going a little bit round the way, but It says to tee it in near the blow-off valve, which there isn't one on this, but I can always move it around if and when I need to, once I've got the new system in place. For now though, following the same pattern on the back of the header tank, I'm just going to plug this in, and we're mounting it right next to the solenoid valve with just a straight piece of hose with a filter in. So I noticed this was actually sitting proud when I tried to use a sticky pad, so I'm just going to, rather than cutting that off, I'm going to use that to my advantage and use it to put a zip tie through. Zip tie it under the wing like that to the main loom, and that can just sit there, and it is connected in with the T-piece. I'll just secure everything together, and that is the gauge cluster and boost controller wired up and plumbed in. Except for this guy, oil temperature sensor. I can't find anywhere to add this in, so I'm going to have a look and see if there's some kind of aftermarket oil cooler I can buy that has an outlet on it for that. Other than that, I'm going to look into whether there's like an engine oil gallery end passage threaded outlet, something I can use like that, but we'll see. So that's everything fitted. Let's start her up and see what we see. So all 4 gauges on, boost gauge on. We're not getting anything other than the fuel pressure, and well, we're not expecting anything on the oil temp. We have, let's see what happens. So I haven't done any calibration of anything, by the way. 50 psi of oil pressure, that's good. No oil temp, that's expected. 2.7 bar of fuel pressure. Let's give it some revs. Oil pressure's rising. Fuel pressure's fluctuating. I think that fuel pressure will only rise significantly under boost. So see what happens there. Boost gauge is registering minus 0.5, is that 0.5 bar? I haven't set anything up on this. It's got AFR readout on there as well, although AFR's not given us anything yet. It's also not given us anything there, but that might be down to the fact that I haven't calibrated the control unit. So I haven't calibrated anything, I haven't set anything up. It's just how it comes out of the box at the minute, so maybe there's a little bit of calibration to do, and we'll go from there. Interestingly, the engine light isn't on. I know it looks like it's on, but if you see next to it the windscreen washer fluid low warning light, that's what it looks like when a light's on. It's bright like that. So for some reason the engine light or lambda light always stays on but dim, and this never happened before the LED, so it's something to do with, it must be supplying some kind of, you know, micro signal, like a few millivolts or something, I don't know. It's obviously supplying something there, but it's not enough to light a bulb up. But when it wants to come on, it will come on, and you can see the difference straight away. If I go to turn the ignition on, that's what it would look like if it was on, and it's not. So you start it up, it goes off, but it's just, there's just light in the background. I don't know why, it just is. So yeah, we've got some baseline figures to work with. I've got some setting up to do, and we'll be ready for the turbo install then. So let's calibrate the AFR gauge then. Ignition on. Don't know if the engine needs to be running for this, but we'll try it without. So we're meant to hold this button in for 3 seconds, and we're meant to see a number 2 come up on the gauge. So that's in. I've held it for more than 3 seconds and nothing's happened. Maybe the engine needs to be running, maybe. I've not seen anything else happening in terms. It says LED display. Now, there's no LED display on the actual controller as far as I'm aware. Let's try with the engine running. Let's try doing a manufacturer's reset, which requires me to hold it in for 8 seconds. I'm not seeing anything there, so let me have a bit more of a look at this. So I've tried holding the button in for 3 seconds, holding the button in for 8 seconds. I've tried this with the ignition off, with the ignition on, and with the engine running. I've tried disconnecting the output that goes to the boost gauge, and that causes a change. That makes it drop from 11.4 down to 10. And I've also tried to do the reset procedure or the calibration procedure with that harness unplugged with no success at the moment. So I'm going to have to contact the company that I got it from and see what they say. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, but the instructions seem pretty simple. Let's move on to the boost gauge, the boost controller with gauge. So I'm not actually seeing any clear instructions of how to get into the menu, although it does show the menu. So if I press the button, it's counting down to a scramble. Okay. Press the top button, turbo, turbo A, turbo B, boost info, set, LAN cut, I think that's short for lean cut, and scramble. So you can go into lean cut, I'm going to call it, O2 type, so AFR, lambda, so there's AF and in. Turn the LAN cut on. The value 14.7. I mean, that's that's obviously ideal stoichiometric ratio, but do we want to be cutting the boost when we reach that, or when we drop leaner than that? I don't know. You could probably go a bit further, but it depends on the condition under load. I'd have to have a look at the sheet, because I've been provided with a sheet for the lambda sensor that shows. Let's just leave it with that for now. I've been provided with a sheet that shows what all the voltage settings are for each lambda value. Let's go into settings, alarm. So alarm 2. So these are different alarm types. Let's just have one. Volume. So that's as loud as it goes. I have to say, that's not very loud, and you would struggle to hear that if you've got a screaming engine going on, but we'll see. We'll keep it on 10. Factory reset. That's pretty cool little little diagram of a factory there. Brightness, I mean, it's already on maximum from factory. Again, not the brightest thing in the world, but it's bright enough on 10. Units, so let's change this to PSI because I prefer that. Direction, so this is if you've had to mount the display the other way around, it'll flip everything for you. And calibration, so for calibration, do not press the pedal, do not turn on power without start engine. Huh? Do not press pedal, turn on power without start the engine. That makes more sense. Yes. Right, okay. I suppose that's done then, is it? Must be. It's not sort of confirmed anything, but it must be done. So, do we press this one again to go back? No, that one. There we go. So we've set that. I think scramble is sort of a function where you can put like the highest boost settings and stuff to go for a bit of a mad sesh. Turbo A. Okay, so I guess that's just taking us into... Oh, okay. Start. So that's 7.2 psi. Wait, what? Is it? Duty, 20%. So this is where you can turn this up. This will increase the boost. By doing so, you can then run the vehicle and see what your new boost level is. And if it's too much, you can wind it down. And if it's not enough, you can keep winding it up. Obviously, the safest way to do this is small increments, starting from the low percentage that it came on. So it came at 20%. And at 20%, I was getting something like 0. I can't remember what it was. I feel like it was about 0.7 bar. And previous to this, I had the manual boost controller with a cheap boost gauge reading sort of between 11 and 12 psi, something like that. So if you think about it like that, it was a little bit low. I would say it was probably running at about maybe 8 or 9 psi when I installed this, and it sat at 20%. So I'm going to put it at 24 for now and see how that goes. Gain. Now, from what I can understand, it says for gain it allows you to adjust the fall off rate. So it says to increase this when the boost level is dropping off. I don't know. I'm guessing this is like how quickly it will bring the boost in. I'm not fully aware of what that is, but I will keep it as it was, and I'll set the boost level first until I'm happy with that. Then I'll go in and start messing with the gain. Warning. So warning, I know that this at the moment we're on stock ECU and it's going to fuel cut. Everyone comes up with different different pressures, but I'm going to say it's going to fuel cut about 14 psi, because it spikes to about that and then sits at 12 for me quite happily, and that's without boost cutting at all, or fuel cutting. So we'll put, wait, no, let's see, actually we'll warn ourselves at 13, and then there's danger. So we can have danger down at, I might turn that beep off because that's a bit annoying, but I don't know if you'd be able to turn the beep off and keep the alarm on. We'll have danger at 14. So that's all the settings in here done. Start. 7.2 psi. I don't quite know what that means. Start at 7.2 psi. Is that when it's going to start actioning? Is that when it's going to start intervening? Because I don't want it to intervene that long. I want it to start intervening last minute. I don't want any... I'll leave it at 8 for now until I've got my boost levels set, but if that's when it starts intervening, I want it to leave that as long as possible so that I'm getting maximum boost coming on as hard as possible until it needs to be stopped, and then I want it to manage it quite well. But that's the great thing about having these different settings, so that you can go in and do more than just leak some air. Boost info. So turbo A and turbo B. So it obviously supports twin turbo setup. We don't have a turbo B. It'd be great to just remove that and have everything showing on A, but it doesn't. So but there we go, we're back to normal. We're now showing 0.0, and for some reason we're showing 9.4 AFR, which is interesting because the gauge is still showing 11.4. So that's showing 6.5 psi. I wonder why it's doing that. And that showed 13. Why is it doing that? That should be showing vacuum. And then what's this for? A, B, and N? I'm not seeing anything in the instructions that tells me what the difference between A, B and N is. I'm guessing A and B, you know, tells you which turbo you're looking at. But N? Don't know. Bit of a strange one. So why is it showing boost now? Let's turn it off. Right, so 14.6. So that's atmospheric pressure. That is atmospheric pressure. What is going on? Let's try recalibrating it again. Is it me, or has that got something at the bottom of it that wasn't there before? No, it's the same. What happens if we press no? Right. So we're at 0 again. Right, we should see a minus figure now. Strange. May have to re-look at this. Anyway, let's just try something else. Let's go into. Oh, that's a different display. A different display and a graph display. Very cool. So let's go into should be at 14.7 to 1, and I happen to have the sheet that tells me that, which is cool. So I mean, I don't know what it is right now, but let's just go with that. And now it's reading danger. Too much boost. Are you sure? Are you sure about that? It seemed to be reading better before I did the calibration. I mean, the instructions have it right here. Where is it? You can use calibrate to adjust the boost value when it is not correct or at a different altitude. Turn on accessory without turning on the engine. Go to settings and choose calibrate for calibrate. Select yes to confirm calibrate to 0 and then start the engine. Maybe then we need to press yes and then start the engine now. an unreasonable amount of voltage drop when I shouldn't be. So yeah, I'll just pop this off the map sensor. 1 second. Right, so we're off the map sensor, so let's go to set, calibrate, yes, so that should be at 0 now, which is true because, yes, there we go, so 0, so we're going to go and plug the vac hose back on, and that should now be reading a vacuum. Yes, it is. Now it's reading a vacuum, so it was, there we go, right, so we're fine. So what happened there was, when I started the engine, the voltage drop was enough to cut the power temporarily to the boost controller, and it just restarted. So that's a bit of an issue as well, but it's something we can get around, but it might just catch people out there. So I'm going to go for a drive, mess about with my boost level, my gain, and all the other good stuff, and see if I can get it running any better than before. Let's remember though, it's still on the small turbo, it's still got the stock ECU telling it to boost cut and fuel cut and all that good stuff, so we're not going to be able to get much better out of it, but I'll set it up nice and it'll be ready for the big turbo. So from a cold start, we can see that we've got around 50 to 55 psi of oil pressure on idle, although that is a fast idle. That was 3000 RPM, rising to 60. 75-ish, I think that's about 4000 RPM. So you'd probably say it could possibly reach 80 psi. This is cold. When it warms up, it drops down to about half the idle pressure. So we're sitting around 22 to 25 psi for oil pressure at idle, and this is with the standard turbo installed. Just ignore the AFR readings at the moment. I was going to say 20 because the sensor's not in situ. I tried fitting it into the factory exhaust. It did read, but because the car wasn't reading its own pickup, the car was running extremely rich because the sensor attached to the car was seeing oxygen in the air. So it was thinking, oh god, there's loads of oxygen in the exhaust, that must mean there's not been enough fuel to burn up the oxygen, therefore I'm going to dump more fuel in. So it was running extremely rich, didn't even want to run, to be fair. So I've put the original one back in for now, and we'll get a proper reading from this once we've got them both installed in the new exhaust system. fuel pressure, so this is a consistent 2.5 to 2.7 bar, which is a bit low if you ask me. The injectors are rated at 3 bar, and obviously I think that the injection system itself should. So the system's meant to run at 3 bar as far as I know, which means maybe it's. I mean, there's no point in saying it's a tired fuel pump, because this is obviously being regulated by the pressure regulator on the rail. So maybe the pressure regulators dropped out of spec, or maybe this is how they were from factory. Either way, it makes me want to put an aftermarket one on to raise it up to 3 bar. So that might be something. And I've finally got a new oil cooler coming with an outlet on it for the oil temperature sensor, so I'll get that installed and get some readings going on here. I've just got a little interior temperature sensor and voltmeter in the form of a power outlet for a charger, and this is the LED display, which I think my camera has just very cleverly fixed the LED flicker on this. Then I'll figure that out when I watch this back, but it was flickering like crazy and then it stopped. So we've got that measuring the vacuum. I have had a bit of a play around with this up to now, and I've had some issues. I've also had some issues with the gauge, because it would only read, it would go green but not read, or it would go white and it would read correctly but it would be stuck on white due to a limitation in the wiring options. I contacted the supplier, who's not the manufacturer but is the registered distributor for the UK, and they were very, very helpful and supplied me with pin swap out instructions to be able to get it to not only stay green but also to read functionally. And they also were able to help me fix an issue with the boost controller where it would constantly, so now it's pulling back. If I turn the ignition off and back on again, instead of saying 0, it would go to 14.6. So it would have like and this is after calibration as well, it would have like a calibration pressure error, and I did a factory reset as recommended, and that fixed that problem. So very good customer service from those guys. So after the engine's heated up, as you can see, we're on 22, 23 psi of oil pressure now, and if we go up to 2000 rpm, if I can get it to stay there, it's about 45. 3000 rpm, we're looking at about 50. So there is pressure there, so I'm not too concerned about that. I don't know how good these were from factory and how good this is compared, but yeah, I mean, we are ticking over a bit fast at the moment as well, just because I've made an adjustment to it, because I was getting it, it was struggling to run with me swapping out the O2 sensor. So I've decided not to bother adjusting it back to normal now, because I'm so close to fitting the other turbo and injectors and map, and you know, it's gonna need resetting anyway, I think. So I'm gonna reset it once all the hardware's been installed. But there's a little bit of fluctuation on the oil on the fuel pressure as well, so obviously it does go up with revs, weirdly, but it also goes up under boost, so we know that the boost reference of the fuel pressure is working. So we're making some progress.